"A widow cannot run my estate," the Duke of Eversleigh said before 43 farming families whose homes depended upon his next decision. By Michaelmas, every one of those farms would belong either to its tenant or to a creditor. Theodore Wycliffe believed Mrs. Lydia Mercer was the least suitable person in Yorkshire to prevent that ruin. He was wrong before the mud had dried on his boots. This is a story of 43 farms, one unforgiving harvest, and a woman who made a proud duke learn the difference between owning land and deserving it. The rain began before dawn on the 12th of February, 1884, and found every broken slate above Eversleigh's old tithe barn. Water tapped into buckets set between the benches, wet wool, lamp smoke, and the sour smell of empty grain sacks thickened the air. 43 tenant farmers stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the blackened rafters, many with their wives beside them and rent notices folded in their coat pockets. At the far end of the barn, Theodore Wycliffe rested one gloved hand on the silver head of his walking stick. He had been Duke of Eversleigh for 91 days. His elder brother's death had brought him home from Vienna to an estate he had not visited for 12 years, and to debts he had not known existed. He was 38, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and dressed in charcoal cloth too fine for a room where the floor had turned to paste beneath 43 pairs of boots. Beside him stood Gideon Rusk, chief steward of Eversleigh. Rusk's waistcoat was the color of old mustard, his hands were pale, and his smile never reached his eyes. "The figures leave no room for sentiment," Rusk announced. 11 holdings are 6 months in arrears. 19 more will fail by Lady Day. His Grace has therefore approved consolidation. The weakest tenancies will be terminated first. A sound moved through the barn, not quite a cry and not quite a word. Abel Croft, who had farmed the North Ridge for 41 years, removed his cap. His fingers crushed its brim. "Terminated means emptied," he said. "Where are our families meant to go?" Rusk looked at him as one might look at a bent nail. "That question is beyond the estate's obligation." From the third bench, Lydia Mercer rose. She was 33 and had worn widow's black for 20 months, though the cuffs of her dress had faded to brown from work and weather. A narrow streak of dried clay marked one sleeve. She carried no reticule, fan, or smelling salts. Under her arm was a rolled field map tied with blue thread. Theodore had noticed her when she entered because she had not bowed as deeply as the others. He noticed her again because Rusk stopped smiling. "Your Grace," Lydia said, "the tenancies are not the weakness. The management is." Rain seemed to strike the roof harder. Rusk drew breath. But Theodore lifted one finger. "You have the advantage of me, madam. Mrs. Lydia Mercer of Willowbank Farm." "Mercer," he repeated. "Your husband was one of my brother's tenants." "My husband died repairing the south drain your steward refused to replace. I have managed Willowbank since the week he was buried." Her voice did not tremble. That appeared to irritate Rusk more than an accusation would have done. Lydia walked to an upturned grain bin and spread her map across it. It was no decorative survey. Blue pencil followed streams and buried drains. Red crosses marked blocked culverts. 43 small squares, one for each holding, had been numbered along the margins. "3 wet harvests weakened us," she said. "Cheap foreign wheat lowered the price when the weather should have raised it. But the estate continues planting the low fields as if the seasons have not changed. Seed is purchased separately at inflated cost. The threshing machine visits without order, so cut grain stands too long in the rain. Lower meadow pays for drainage it has not received. High fell pays cartage twice. These are grave claims," Theodore said. "They are entries from your own receipts." Rusk stepped towards the map. "Receipts obtained by what authority?" "By asking the people who paid them." A few farmers lowered their faces to hide smiles. Lydia pointed to the blue marks. "Open the old relief cut before March. Buy seed as one estate instead of 43 desperate farms. Put barley on the higher ground, roots in the exhausted strips, and cattle on fields that cannot meet the price of imported wheat. Repair the clay drains first, not after another crop has drowned. Give the tenants until Michaelmas, and they will pay. Theodore studied the map. It was exact, practical, and far more alarming than Rusk's neat columns had been. Yet every lesson of his upbringing warned him against yielding authority in public. His father had once dismissed a bailiff for allowing a tenant to finish a sentence. His brother had lost money by trusting men who called themselves friends. Theodore had returned determined never to look uncertain on his own land. "And who would direct this grand rescue?" he asked. Lydia met his gaze. "I would." Rusk laughed first. Two gentlemen from the estate office followed him. No tenant did. Theodore looked at Lydia's worn morning dress, the clay on her sleeve, and the heads turned towards her as if she already possessed the authority she had requested. Pride reached his tongue before judgment could stop it. "A widow cannot run my estate." The silence that followed was so complete that water dripping into the nearest bucket sounded like a clock. Lydia's fingers tightened once around the edge of the map. She did not lower her eyes. "No, Your Grace," she said, "but this widow can save it." Theodore felt the rebuke land clean and public. Rusk reached for the map, but Lydia rolled it before his hand touched the paper. "Give me 6 farms," she continued. "The 6 Rusk intends to empty first. Suspend their notices until harvest and let me prove the plan." "With whose money?" Theodore asked. "With the money you are already losing." A cough covered someone's laugh. Theodore's face hardened. 6 farms until the 1st of September. No charge may be made to the estate without my written approval. If one rent falls further behind because of your experiment, the notices will proceed. All 43 share the same drains, roads, machine, and market. 6 cannot be saved alone. Then you should have asked for less with greater humility, and you should have inherited fewer farms with greater knowledge. Abel Croft shut his eyes. Rusk looked delighted. Theodore stepped close enough to smell rainwater in Lydia's hair. "Take the 6, Mrs. Mercer, or take nothing." She held his gaze for another heartbeat. "I shall take the 6. Then she turned to the gathered tenants. "And the other 37 will not be abandoned." That was the moment Theodore should have understood her. He saw defiance where there was duty, insolence where there was courage, and a widow standing alone where, in truth, 43 farms had already begun to stand behind her. By noon, Lydia was back at Willowbank. She removed her wet dress, put on an older one, and carried every sack of seed wheat from the loft into the kitchen passage. There were only 14 tin. Her late husband, Samuel, had kept them against a hard year, stitching a small cross into each corner so the grain would never be confused with feed. 14 sacks would not sow 6 farms. Lydia took Samuel's silver watch from the mantel. It had stopped at 11 minutes past 3 on the morning he died. She had never wounded again. At the village pawnbroker it brought £12 and 8 shillings. With that money she bought another 9 sacks, 2 bundles of drain rods, lamp oil, and enough bread and cheese to feed 20 men for a day. By sunset, carts were arriving at Willowbank without being summoned. Abel Croft brought barley seed. Martha Keene brought 3 strong sons and a daughter who could mend harness better than any saddler in the parish. Ned Hales, the miller, brought a coil of rope and the key to the abandoned estate kiln where clay drain collars had once been fired. "His Grace said 6 farms," Abel reminded her. He did. Lydia divided the seed with a brass scoop. He did not say 37 others could not help them. They began at Lower Meadow, where water lay in silver sheets over what should have been winter wheat. The buried drain had not failed by age. Someone had packed its outlet with broken stone and turf. Lydia knelt in freezing water and pulled the obstruction loose with both hands. Black mud rushed around her wrists. When the channel opened, The field gave a low, sucking sigh. Ned Hales stared at the stones. "No flood put those there. Keep them," Lydia said, "and say nothing yet." For 12 days they cleared ditches by lantern light. They marked seed sacks by farm and weight. They laid the surviving clay pipes with narrow gaps between their collars, covering each joint with a shard so loose earth would not enter before the water did. Lydia kept every purchase on separate cards rather than in a single book, one card for each farm, because a missing card could be seen at once. On the 13th morning the Duke arrived. Theodore's horse stopped at the edge of Lower Meadow. Lydia stood 20 yards away in a man's old coat over her dress, directing 2 teams as they opened the relief cut. Her boots had sunk beyond the ankle. She looked neither graceful nor apologetic. She looked competent. Rusk remained mounted beside the Duke. "A spectacle, your Grace. Half the village has neglected its own work to indulge her." Theodore watched a line of children carry stones from the ditch, while their mothers spread bread on an overturned gate. No one appeared neglected. Every movement had an order. "Where are the drainage tiles I approved last week?" he asked. Rusk adjusted his gloves. "Delayed at the railway depot." Below them, Lydia lifted her head. "They arrived 5 days ago." Rusk's face barely changed. "You are mistaken. The station master sent word. Your clerk refused the consignment because the estate would not pay the cartage." Theodore turned. "Did you refuse them?" "The invoice was irregular." "Then regularize it and have them here by evening." Rusk bowed in the saddle. "As your Grace commands." He rode away without looking at Lydia. Theodore dismounted. The mud took the shine from his boot before he had crossed 3 steps. "You could have informed me directly," he said. "I wrote twice. I received no letter." "Then you have discovered a second blocked channel on your estate." Her answer should have angered him. Instead, his mouth nearly betrayed him with a smile. "Show me the first." Lydia led him to the drain outlet and pointed to the pile of packed stone. "This was deliberate. By Rusk? I make accusations when I possess proof. You accused the management in a barn full of tenants." "I possessed proof." He crouched beside the outlet. Water slipped steadily through the new channel. "Why damage a field belonging to the estate?" "Because a ruined tenant accepts any price for his remaining stock." "Because an empty holding can be joined to another, and leased for more." "Because desperate people do not examine invoices." "You believe someone profits from failure. Someone always does." Theodore rose and found her studying him with an expression he could not read. "Do you include me in that judgment?" he asked. "I do not yet know what profits you value." The wind lifted a strand of hair from beneath her plain felt hat. Theodore had known women who practiced silence as an invitation and conversation as a performance. Lydia's silence was neither. It was a closed gate, and he had earned his place outside it. "My brother trusted Rusk," he said. "Your brother spent 11 months of each year in London. You have an answer for everything. No." "I have questions no one here was permitted to ask." A shout came from the ditch. One bank had begun to collapse where Abel stood below it. Lydia ran before Theodore understood the danger. She slid down the wet slope, seized Abel's coat, and pulled as the clay wall folded into the channel. Theodore reached them and caught Lydia around the waist. All 3 fell backwards into the reeds while mud poured over Abel's boots. For a moment Lydia was against Theodore's chest, breathing hard, one muddy hand gripping his sleeve. He felt the quick beat of her heart through the sodden layers between them. She looked up. Her eyes were gray, not brown as he had thought in the barn. "Release me, your Grace." He did so at once. Abel coughed and pushed himself upright. "Beg pardon. You are not the one standing where he does not understand the ground." Lisa said Theodore accepted the rebuke. He also took off his coat, rolled his shirt sleeves, and spent the next 2 hours carrying clay away from the weakened bank. By evening his palms had blistered. No one commented. That silence instructed him more effectively than mockery. The tiles arrived after dark. March brought frost, then rain, then 3 clear days that smelled of turned earth and coal smoke. The 6 trial farms sowed first. Their seed had been purchased together and weighed twice, once at the depot and once at Willowbank. Lydia arranged the threshing contractor months before harvest, when his fee was lower. She persuaded the high farms to sow barley and oats where wheat had failed, and she reserved 2 wet meadows for cattle. The other 37 farms copied what they could. Some shared seed. Some exchanged labor instead of money. Lydia's kitchen became an office from dawn until midnight. 43 cards stood in rows on the mantel, held upright in a wooden rack Samuel had once used for drying spoons. Theodore began arriving without rusk. At first, he brought questions written on cream paper. Then he stopped writing them because Lydia answered more quickly while walking. She taught him that a field's color changed before its yield did, that sedge at the edge of wheat meant water was trapped below, and that tenants measured an owner not by speeches, but by whether a broken roof remained broken after he had seen it. He taught her the language of the railway companies and showed her how to negotiate a lower freight charge by promising a full estate consignment. His years abroad had made him skilled at reading men who concealed their price. Lydia watched him reduce a merchant's fee by 1/3 without once raising his voice. "You are less useless than your boots suggested," she said as they left the station office. "From you, Mrs. Mercer, that approaches tenderness. Do not become vain. The road home is long. It was long enough for the spring sky to darken." Rain struck the carriage roof while the wheels sank into a rutted lane. When the axle lodged against a buried stone, the driver went ahead on 1 horse for help, leaving Theodore and Lydia inside the motionless carriage. The air smelled of damp leather and the lavender Lydia kept in her cuff. Lightning whitened the glass. She did not startle, but her hand closed around the edge of the seat. "Samuel died during a storm," she said before Theodore could ask. "Not from it. He had spent 2 nights in the south drain because Rusk said repairs could wait. Fever took him 6 days later. And my brother did nothing? Your brother sent flowers." Theodore looked towards the rain-blurred window. "I am sorry you did not kill him. No. I merely inherited every condition that did, and assumed the title made me wise." She turned towards him. He removed his gloves. Mud remained beneath 1 thumbnail, despite the servant who had tried to clean it that morning. "My father believed uncertainty was a public disease. If a tenant saw hesitation, he said, obedience would rot. My brother learned to avoid the land altogether. I learned to make decisions before anyone could see that I lacked the answer. That explains your cruelty in the barn. It does not excuse it. No." He appreciated that she did not hurry to comfort him. "I was wrong, Lydia." It was the first time he had used her given name. "About your ability, about the farms, about much else besides." The rain softened. She looked down at his bare hands. "You humiliated me before 43 families," she said. "A private apology repairs your conscience. It does not repair my name. Then I shall repair it where I damaged it." When words cannot be mistaken for charity. The answer displeased her, but not entirely. Theodore saw it in the slight easing of her shoulders. The driver returned with 2 farm horses. By the time the carriage moved again, the space between them had changed. It held no promise, yet it no longer felt like a wall. 2 days later, Lydia found the first short-weight sack. The consignment had come from Calder Grain and Provision Company, the supplier Rusk had used for years. Each sack was invoiced at 200 weight. Lydia's brass scale showed 7 pounds missing from the first, 9 from the second, and 6 from the third. A blue cord sealed every mouth, impressed with a tiny rook. She cut 1 seal free and placed it in her pocket. At the railway depot, the station master remembered the sacks. Their original labels had named a different merchant. Calder's labels had been pasted over them after arrival. More troubling still, the station copy recorded the full weight. "Who collected them?" Theodore asked. The station master glanced at Lydia, then at the Duke. "Mr. Rusk's nephew, your Grace." Rusk denied wrongdoing with such calm that Theodore almost admired him. "Sacks settled during transport," the steward said. "Scales differ, labels tier. Mrs. Mercer has spent 2 months searching for a villain because grief has taught her to need one." Lydia's face lost all color. They stood in Theodore's library at Eversleigh Hall. Shelves rose 2 stories above them, reached by a narrow iron gallery. Rusk had placed the estate invoices in perfect rows on the desk. Each total agreed with the next. "Speak of the accounts," Theodore said. "Not of Mrs. Mercer's grief." Rusk bowed. "Then let us speak of her accounts. £12 and 8 shillings appeared in her project on the day after your meeting. She has not declared their source. Seed bearing her late husband's private mark was distributed to estate farms. Laborers were diverted from contracted work. If impropriety is our concern, your Grace should examine all of it." "The money was mine," Lydia said. "From where?" she did not answer. Theodore saw pain enter her expression, followed by anger at having allowed anyone to see it. "Lydia, I sold something that belonged to me." Rusk spread his hands, conveniently beyond verification. Theodore dismissed him, but the damage remained. Lydia walked to the door. "Wait!" She stopped without turning. "What did you sell?" Theodore asked. "Samuel's watch." He understood then why the question had wounded her. "You should not have needed to do that. No. Your estate should have supplied seed honestly. I shall repay you." "You cannot repay what I sold." She left before he found an answer. Theodore ordered an independent examination of the estate accounts. Mr. Finch, his solicitor in York, arrived 3 days later. Rusk received him with coffee, complete records, and a confidence that made guilt seem almost vulgar. The figures showed no theft. They showed something cleverer. Calder grain charged Eversleigh more than the market price, but not enough to prove fraud. Cartage appeared twice in several quarters, yet each charge bore a different description. Repairs were ordered, cancelled, and ordered again. Money disappeared not through a single open door, but through 100 cracks. "Suspicion is not evidence," Finch warned. "Dismiss Rusk if you no longer trust him, but accuse him publicly, and he may bring an action." Theodore stood at the library window. Across the park, Lydia walked beside a wagon carrying seed. Even at a distance, he recognized the way people turned towards her for instruction. "Then we find evidence," he said. April opened warm. Green blades covered the 6 trial farms first, even and thick. On the other holdings, the same methods began to show. Water no longer stood in lower meadow. Barley took root on high fell. A cooperative dairy started with 12 cows and a churn borrowed from Willowbank. Nothing was abundant, but nothing was idle. Rusk changed his method. He delayed coal for the portable steam engine reserved for harvest. He persuaded 2 merchants not to extend credit. Anonymous notices appeared on cottage doors claiming the Duke intended to replace local labor with machines. At the Sunday market, someone whispered that Lydia meant to become Duchess by starving the tenants into gratitude. She heard the rumor from Martha Keene, who repeated it only because silence would have allowed it to grow. "No one with sense believes it," Martha said. "Sense is not required for cruelty." That afternoon, Theodore found Lydia repairing a boundary fence alone. She struck each nail harder than necessary. "I have heard the gossip," he said. "Then you have been entertained. I have ordered an inquiry. An inquiry will announce that the Duke is deeply concerned about a widow's reputation. That will improve matters." He took the hammer from her hand before she split the post. "Tell me what you would have me do." "Nothing. You do not believe that." "I believe your notice would carry more weight than my denial. That is precisely why I will not ask for it." Theodore set the hammer down. Is the rumor entirely false?" She stared at him. He regretted the question at once, but he did not retreat from it. "I did not ask whether you intended to trap me. I asked whether the thought of us is hateful to you." The wind moved through the new leaves above them. Lydia's voice lowered. "Samuel was kind, not grand, not educated beyond the village school, and not a man anyone would write songs about. He never made me feel that my mind was an inconvenience. When he died, I thought the part of me that could choose another person had been buried with him." Theodore waited. "Then you came home," she continued, "and insulted me in a barn, an irresistible courtship." The corner of her mouth moved despite herself. He stepped closer. "I will not ask you to forget him. You have not yet earned the right to ask me anything. Then I shall continue earning it." He lifted her gloved hand, but stopped before touching it to his lips. The choice remained visibly hers. Lydia could have withdrawn. She did not. His kiss rested against her knuckles for only a moment. From the road, a cart approached too quickly. Abel Croft drove it, his face gray beneath the brim of his hat. He carried a bundle of papers tied with black cord. "Notices," he said, "every holding, all 43. The documents bore the estate seal, and gave notice that tenancies would terminate at Michaelmas for arrears, unauthorized alterations, or failure to follow prescribed cropping. Even farms that owed nothing had been cited for breaking agreements. The 6 trial farms were accused of making improvements without the landlord's consent. Theodore read the first notice twice. "I sign none of these." "Your name is printed beneath the seal," Lydia said. "Rusk controls the press in the estate office," Abel muttered. Theodore's anger became very still. The new Agricultural Holdings Act began this year. He means to remove them before their claims for improvements can be properly assessed, then bury the estate in disputes while buying the stock cheaply. Lydia looked towards the green fields. "Or he means to frighten them into abandoning the work now, so there is no harvest to protect them." Theodore tore the first notice across his name. "Bring every paper to the tithe barn at 6, he said. "I shall revoke them before the same witnesses who heard me grant the trial." At 6:43 families gathered again beneath the leaking roof. This time Theodore wore no gloves. Rusk stood near the door with 2 constables and an expression of injured dignity. "His Grace has been misled," Rusk said before Theodore reached the front. "Mrs. Mercer has exceeded her authority, diverted estate property, and encouraged tenants to violate their agreements. I issued lawful notices to protect Eversleigh." "You used my seal without permission," Theodore replied. "Your late brother's standing authority remains in the office records." Rusk produced a folded paper. Frederick Wycliffe's signature appeared at the bottom, giving the chief steward broad power to act where estate revenue was endangered. Finch examined it. "The authority may be valid." Rusk turned towards the farmers. "His Grace may dislike the necessity, but he cannot repair this estate by allowing a bereaved woman to gamble with it." "Enough," Theodore said. "Then ask her about the missing seed." 2 constables opened the barn's side room. Inside stood 21 sacks bearing Samuel Mercer's stitched cross. Lydia had never seen them before. Rusk held up a receipt. "Estate wheat delivered to Mrs. Lydia Mercer and removed from the granary without payment. Her signature is here." Theodore took the paper. The writing resembled Lydia's hand. 43 families watched his face. "Did you sign this?" he asked. Her eyes changed. The question, not the accusation, struck her. "No." "Can anyone prove where you were on the date written here?" Finch asked gently. "At Lower Meadow for most of the day. Alone at Willowbank that evening." Rusk lowered his voice. "Grief encourages strange certainties." Theodore crossed the space between them and tore the receipt in half. "My brother gave you authority to protect Eversleigh," he said. "He did not give you authority to forge a tenant's name." Rusk's calm finally cracked. "You have no proof of forgery. Mrs. Mercer signs her accounts Lydia S. Mercer. The S is for Sarah. It appears on every card, receipt, and letter she has written. Your imitation omits it, because the estate rolls record only Lydia Mercer. Lydia looked at Theodore. He had noticed, somewhere among the hundreds of details she had offered him, he had noticed the one that defended her when it mattered. Rusk recovered quickly. A clerical irregularity. Then you will not object to Mr. Finch taking the estate keys and records until the inquiry is complete. I object to being condemned because your grace has become infatuated with a tenant. Theodore faced the room. Mrs. Mercer's honor requires no infatuation to defend it. It requires only evidence, which she has supplied for months while I was slow enough to doubt her. He held up the bundle of notices. Every notice is revoked. Every authorized improvement will be recognized. No tenant will be removed before a proper account is heard. Mr. Rusk is suspended from this hour. The relief in the barn came out as breath, sobs, and one sharp cheer that others quickly joined. Rusk did not wait for the constables. He placed the office keys on the grain bin and walked through the crowd. People moved aside, but no one bowed. Lydia watched him leave. He surrendered too easily. He has lost his office, Theodore said. He has not lost whatever he meant to purchase with 43 ruined farms. The next morning, Rusk had disappeared. So had the original estate contracts, the railway tickets, and the key to the North Mill sluice. May passed beneath a sky of polished blue. The wheat rose to Lydia's knees. Barley rippled over High Fell. The cooperative cows produced enough milk for the village and enough cheese to sell in York. Hope returned cautiously, like an animal approaching an open hand. Theodore appointed Lydia acting land agent for all 43 farms. He made the announcement outside the estate office, before the tenants and clerks, in the same clear voice with which he had once dismissed her. Mrs. Mercer will direct all agricultural operations until Michaelmas, he said. Her instructions carry my authority. Anyone unable to accept that may surrender his position. 2 clerks resigned before noon. 3 others remained and discovered within a week that Lydia demanded exactness but never humiliation. Her office was a small room above the cart shed. It had an external stone stair, 1 window over the yard, and a ceiling low enough that Theodore struck his head the first time he entered. He brought a new desk. Lydia refused it because the drawers swelled in damp weather. He brought a brass lamp. She accepted it because it allowed her to work after sunset. 1 success in 6, he observed. Your average improves. They worked side by side through June. Theodore traveled to Hull and secured a contract for barley at a fair price. Lydia arranged the portable threshing engine so no farm's sheaves would stand waiting more than 4 days. They converted an unused granary into a common seed store and placed 2 keys on separate rings, 1 kept by the estate and 1 by the tenants' committee. Every precaution carried the shape of Rusk's betrayal. Yet no trace of him appeared. On Midsummer Day, the first heads of wheat formed. Theodore and Lydia walked through Willowbank at dusk. Pollen dusted the hem of her gray dress. She had set mourning black aside a week earlier. The change was small, but Theodore had noticed it from the far side of the yard. "Will you leave when the harvest is finished?" he asked. "My appointment ends at Michaelmas. That was not my question." Lydia brushed 1 green head of wheat between her fingers. "You once told me I could not run your estate. I remember every word. Now you have given me authority over it. A suspicious woman might think you prefer me useful. A truthful man would admit that your usefulness first forced him to see you clearly." She looked at him. "But it is not why I ask you to stay," he said. "When you enter a room, I become aware of every answer I have accepted too easily. When you leave it, the room becomes less honest." "I have lived among charming people for years, Lydia. I did not know how lonely charm could be until I met someone who would rather tell me the truth." Her breath caught. slight enough that another man might have missed it. Theodore did not touch her. "I love you." The evening wind moved across the field, turning the wheat in one long green wave. Lydia closed her eyes. "Do not ask me now. I was not going to ask. You were, eventually. Ask when the 43 farms are safe. I cannot tell whether my heart is choosing you or merely the future we are fighting for. Then I shall wait until you can." She opened her eyes. "That may be a long time. I wasted 12 years away from Eversleigh. I will not complain of a few months spent becoming worthy of it." Lydia reached for his hand. It was the first time she had touched him by choice. July brought heat. The barley paled first, then the wheat. Men sharpened scythes, women repaired binding cloths, and children chased sparrows from the fields with clappers. The reaping machine worked the broadest ground, but steep strips still fell by hand. Cut stalks were bound into sheaves and stood in stooks so air could dry the grain before carting. The estate had never looked richer. Its safety remained an illusion. 3 weeks before harvest, Ned Hales found a dead fish in the mill race. Then another. The water below the north sluice had fallen while the upper pond rose against its banks. "The gate is closed," he told Lydia. "Not stuck. Closed and chained. The north sluice controlled more than the mill." In heavy rain, it diverted water into the old relief channel that Lydia had reopened in February. Without that outlet, the beck would spill across the lower valley. 19 farms stood directly in its path. Runoff from the hills would then carry into the eastern drains. Threatening the rest, Theodore sent workmen with cutting tools. They found the sluice house locked by a new iron door. Someone had removed the outer operating wheel and sealed the chain inside. "Break the masonry," Theodore ordered. The first sledgehammer exposed a second wall of packed brick behind the old stone. Rusk had prepared the obstruction months earlier, while the estate still paid his invoices. They worked for 2 days. The wall yielded by inches. On the third evening, clouds built over the western ridge, bruised purple beneath a yellow sky. The barometer at Eversleigh Hall dropped so quickly that the housekeeper called Theodore from dinner to see it. Lydia arrived before he reached the door. Her hair had escaped its pins. Dust streaked her cheek. "The upper pond is already at the red mark," she said. "If the storm breaks over the ridge, we have 3 hours before it overtops. The men are still cutting the inner wall. They will not reach the chain in time. Then we evacuate the lower farms and lose the grain. Fields can be replanted. People cannot. Not before Michaelmas. If the grain goes, the farms go with it." Thunder rolled beyond the hill. Theodore took her shoulders. "I will not trade a life for a harvest, nor will I. That is why you must trust me without asking for an explanation." She spread the field map on the hall floor. A faded blue line curved away from the upper pond, crossed an abandoned quarry, and joined the eastern beck below the farms. "The original relief cut," she said. "It was filled when the railway embankment was built. The tunnel beneath the line may still exist." "May?" "Samuel found its stone mouth 7 years ago. Rusk ordered him to cover it because maintaining 2 watercourses cost too much." Theodore understood. "If we open the tunnel from the quarry side, the pond can bypass the chain sluice, if it has not collapsed." Rain struck the windows in one hard sheet. Theodore looked at the 43 numbered squares on her map. "Tell me what you require." Lydia gave him 12 instructions without pausing. "Ring the estate bell. Send every child and elderly person to the stone school on high ground. Move livestock from lower meadow. Put teams at 3 ditch crossings. Bring quarry picks, ropes, lanterns, and the portable steam engine. Hold carts at the eastern road." No one was to enter the old tunnel until it had been tested with a line. Theodore repeated every order, then carried them out. The estate bell had not rung at night since the great fire 30 years earlier. Its iron voice crossed the valley through rain and thunder. Lamps appeared at cottage doors. Carts rolled from farm lanes. No one asked whether Lydia Mercer possessed authority. They heard her name attached to the orders and moved. At the quarry, water already streamed down the rock face. Men dug where Samuel's old mark, a cross cut into limestone, showed through the moss. Picks struck rubble, then brick, then hollow space. "Tunnel!" Abel Croft shouted. They tore the opening wide enough for a man. Cold air breathed from darkness, carrying the smell of stagnant water. Lydia tied a lantern to a rope and lowered it inside. The flame remained alive. She sent the lantern farther. At 30 feet the rope stopped. "A collapse," Ned said. "Or another wall," Lydia replied. The upper pond overflowed its first bank. Far below, the dark line of water spread into lower meadow. Theodore seized a pick. "We go in together." "No, you remain outside and keep the teams moving." "You ask me to trust you, not to watch you enter a buried tunnel alone." "I know its course, and I can swing a hammer. Poorly, then you must supervise." There was no time to argue further. They tied ropes around their waists and entered with Ned Hales behind them. The tunnel forced Theodore to bend almost double. Water covered their boots and rose with every yard. Brick scraped Lydia's shoulder. The lantern flame threw their shadows ahead like bent creatures crawling through the earth. At the obstruction, they found new timber beams wedged across the old channel and backed by sacks of clay. One sack bore a blue cord and the impressed rook of Calder grain. Rusk had not merely closed the sluice. He had prepared to drown the valley. Theodore drove his pick into the first beam. Lydia attacked the clay between them. Ned pulled loose sacks back through the tunnel. Water pressed from the far side with a deep, growing groan. "It will break towards us," Theodore warned. "That is the intention." "I meant the entire barrier." "I know." They cut a narrow hole near the roof. A jet of brown water burst through and struck Theodore's shoulder. The lantern went out. Darkness swallowed them. Theodore heard Lydia gasp, then the scrape of her hand against brick. He found her wrist. "I have you, the rope," she said. "Keep hold of the rope." Behind them, Ned shouted that the water was rising at the entrance. Men outside hauled the guide line taut. Another beam cracked. "Out," Theodore ordered. Lydia pulled against his grip. "The lower brace must come first. If we leave it, the opening will clog. The wall is failing." "Then give me the pick." She found the handle in darkness. One strike rang against wood. A second landed lower. On the third, the brace split with a sound like a pistol shot. The barrier gave way. Water hit them from behind, drove them to their knees, and filled the tunnel with roaring black force. Theodore locked one arm around Lydia and the other around the rope. Ned vanished ahead. For one terrible instant, the rope slackened. Then 40 men outside pulled Theodore, and Lydia were dragged through brick, mud, and broken timber. His shoulder struck the tunnel mouth. Lydia's hand slipped from his coat. He caught the blue thread at her sleeve, felt it tear, and reached again until his fingers closed around her arm. They came out beneath a storm of rain and lantern light. Theodore rolled onto the quarry floor with Lydia against him. Water thundered from the open tunnel, crossed the relief cut, and rushed east beneath the railway. A cheer rose, but Lydia lifted her head at once. "The lower crossing," she coughed. "If the carts are still on it—" "They were cleared," Abel shouted. "Everyone." Ned Hales lay nearby, bruised and breathing. Men hauled him farther from the torrent. For a few minutes it appeared they had won. Then a lantern moved on the ridge above the quarry. Gideon Rusk stood beside the old operating post, one hand on a lever controlling the quarry gate. Opening it would send the diverted water back towards the lower farms. "Stop him!" Theodore shouted. Rusk threw his weight against the lever. Rust shrieked. The gate shifted. Lydia rose before Theodore could restrain her. She seized the loose end of the steam engine's drive belt and ran it around the gate wheel. "Start the engine," she called. The engine stood 20 yards away beneath a canvas sheet, brought at her order to power the quarry pump. Abel pulled the sheet free. Ned's son opened the steam valve. The flywheel turned once, hesitated, then gathered speed. The leather belt tightened. Rusk's lever tore from his hands. The gate wheel turned in the opposite direction, closing the channel he had tried to open. He stumbled into the mud as two constables reached him. One of them pulled a leather case from beneath Rusk's coat. Inside were the missing way tickets, the original tenant contracts, and shares in Calder Grain made out to Gideon Rusk's sister. The evidence had been against his heart while he attempted to destroy it. Rusk looked at Theodore across the rain. "Those farms were failing before you came home. I only arranged to profit from what was inevitable." Lydia stood between them, soaked, bleeding at one temple, and steady on her feet. "It was never inevitable," she said. "You had to block every path by which they might." Rusk's gaze sharpened with hatred. "You are still a tenant, and you are no longer the steward." The constables led him down from the ridge. Dawn found the 43 farms wet but standing. Lower Meadow had taken water to the hedges. 2 stacks had fallen, 3 bridges were damaged, and 1 cattle shed had lost its roof. Not one person was missing. Not one field of standing grain had been carried away. From the quarry, Theodore watched farmers walk the boundaries by gray morning light. He could distinguish the relief cut as a silver line running safely east. Lydia stood beside him, wrapped in his coat, mud dried on her face. Her blue cuff thread hung broken. "All 43?" she asked Abel when he climbed the ridge. The old farmer nodded. "All 43. Only then did Lydia close her eyes. Theodore caught her before she fell. She woke at Eversleigh Hall, with clean linen beneath her cheek and daylight at the curtains. A physician had stitched the cut at her temple. Martha Keene slept in a chair beside the bed. Theodore stood at the window, still wearing the mud-stained trousers from the night before. "How long?" Lydia asked. He turned so quickly that the curtain ring struck the rod. 7 hours. The farms? Safe. The upper pond? Falling. Rusk? In the York jail by now. She let her head sink back. "Then why do you look as if the estate burned?" Theodore came to the bed. "Because I felt your hand leave my coat in that tunnel." Martha woke, saw his face, and departed without a word. He sat beside Lydia. "I have spent months learning that land is not saved by issuing orders from dry rooms. Last night I learned something worse. I can lose Eversleigh and remain myself. I cannot lose you and claim the same." Lydia's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "Do not ask me while I am in your bed and unable to stand," she whispered. A rough laugh escaped him, half relief and half pain. "You remain impossible. I remain practical." He took her hand carefully. "Then stand soon." Rusk's case opened every locked question. Calder Grain had been purchasing the debts of Eversleigh tenants through intermediaries. Once the farms failed, the company intended to lease the consolidated land to a northern syndicate for cattle and quarrying. The false invoices, short-weight sacks, blocked drains, and forged notices had all served the same purpose. Samuel Mercer had discovered part of the scheme before his death. Rusk's refusal to repair the south drain had been punishment as much as greed. Theodore paid every verified improvement claim and canceled the fraudulent charges. He sold 2 London properties to clear the estate's legitimate debt. No tenant was asked to carry the price of his family's neglect. Harvest began 8 days after the storm. Wheat fell beneath the reaper in broad golden swaths. On the slopes, men cut by hand and women bound the stalks. Sheaves stood in stooks across the fields, 6 or 8 together, heads lifted from the damp ground to dry in the wind. The portable steam engine moved from farm to farm according to Lydia's schedule, its belt driving the threshing drum while chaff filled the air like brown snow. For 3 weeks Eversleigh smelled of straw, hot iron, horses, and bread carried into the fields. No machine waited for missing coal, no cart paid twice. Grain from the 43 farms traveled under one contract, weighed on a scale witnessed by both estate and tenants. At Michaelmas, the final accounts were read not inside the hall, but in the harvested field above Willowbank. The stubble shone copper beneath the afternoon sun. 43 tenant families formed a wide half-circle. At the center stood 43 sheaves, one from each farm, bound together with blue thread. Mr. Finch announced the result. Every farm had met its current expenses. 36 had paid all rent due. The remaining 7 had signed fair schedules for arrears without threat of eviction. The barley contract and dairy had produced enough surplus to fund permanent drainage repairs before winter. All 43 farms had survived. Theodore stepped forward. He wore a plain dark coat and carried no walking stick. In February, he said, Mrs. Mercer brought me a plan. I answered her knowledge with arrogance. Before many of you, I said, a widow cannot run my estate. No one moved. Lydia stood beside the bound sheaves in a deep blue dress, one hand resting against the bandage that remained at her temple. I was wrong, Theodore continued. Mrs. Mercer did not merely run Eversleigh. She saved every farm upon it. She saved your homes, corrected my ignorance, and proved that authority without attention is only another form of neglect. He turned towards Lydia. The estate is mine by inheritance. Its trust is hers by merit. I have appointed Lydia Mercer permanent land agent of Eversleigh at a salary equal to any man who has held the office, with authority recorded in the estate settlement and protected from dismissal by any future holder of my title. For one suspended second, Lydia could not speak. Then Abel Croft began to clap. Martha joined him. The sound spread until 43 families were cheering beneath the open sky. Theodore did not kneel. He did not turn Lydia's victory into a performance of his desire. He stood beside her while the applause belonged entirely to her. When it ended, she faced him. You repaired my name where you damaged it. Words were the smallest part. They mattered. Then I shall choose the next ones carefully. He waited until the last cart had left the field. Sunset burned along the western hedges. The 43 sheaves remained between them, their blue binding bright against the grain. Lydia, he said, I will not offer you rescue. You have never required it. I will not ask you to surrender your work, your property, Samuel's memory, or any part of the woman who stood against me in that barn. She watched him without breathing. I can offer only partnership, he continued. An imperfect house, a title I am still learning to deserve, and a man who will be wrong again, but will never again make pride a virtue. Will you marry me? Lydia looked towards Willowbank. Smoke lifted from its chimney. Beyond it, lamps appeared one by one across the farms she had fought to keep alive. If I marry you, she said, Willowbank remains mine. The law now recognizes that so will our settlement. My salary remains mine, yes. And when I tell you a drain is blocked, I shall bring a shovel. Her laugh broke through the last restraint between them. Then yes, Theodore. He touched her face as if approaching something both strong and precious. When he kissed her, the field held only the dry whisper of stubble and the evening call of rooks returning to the trees. They married in November at the small parish church, with the doors left open, because the building could not contain 43 farming families. Lydia wore gray silk rather than white, and Samuel's sister placed a sprig of rosemary in her bouquet for remembrance. Theodore arrived with mud on one boot. Lydia saw it, smiled, and married him anyway. Marriage did not turn her into a decorative duchess. At 8 each morning, she climbed the stone steps to the office above the cart shed. Theodore often joined her, though he learned to duck beneath the ceiling. They disagreed about rents, roofs, machinery, and nearly everything worth improving. He never again mistook disagreement for disloyalty. The next spring, the estate finished the permanent relief channel. At its mouth, masons set a simple stone bearing no ducal crest. Lydia had chosen the inscription herself. It read, "Water needs a path, so does truth," years later. People still told the story of the harvest when a widow saved 43 farms. Some remembered the storm. Some remembered the corrupt steward. The oldest tenants remembered a duke standing in a wet barn and speaking as if ownership made him infallible. Lydia remembered something quieter. On the first morning of every harvest, 43 sheaves appeared beneath the granary window, each tied with a short length of blue thread. No order required them, no account recorded them. They were simply left there by families who still had land to reap. And beside them, before the sun reached the yard, the Duke of Eversleigh always placed the 44th. Thank you for staying with Lydia Mercer through every flooded field, broken promise, and hard-won harvest. Her story reminds us that dignity is not granted by rank, and real leadership begins when pride finally learns to listen. If this story moved you, please like the video so the algorithm can help more historical romance lovers discover it. Share it with someone who enjoys stories of courageous women, humbled dukes, and second chances earned through action. Subscribe to Secrets of Belgrave and turn on notifications for the next complete historical romance. And tell us in the comments, at what moment did Theodore finally prove that he deserved Lydia's trust?